Now, remember, Trump was giving his speech. He was encouraging people to go protest at the Capitol building to encourage, in his own words, to encourage Republicans to make the right choice in voting for the dueling electors, because you had dueling electors in 7 states with the Electoral College vote. This was, of course, people at the time when Trump was still speaking were breaching the Capitol building. Some police are seen waving them in and opening the gates. And Capitol Police, right? And there's, of course, the narrative was used after that to basically go after Trump supporters and to try to impeach Trump himself. But one of the big narratives on this, again, right? The narrative is an officer, they said it was violent, right? The violent Trump protests that led to 5 people being killed. The information's coming out now what actually happened. First off, Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot in the neck, she was killed by Capitol Police. The other three other individuals died of health complications, and the officer who was killed, new information's coming out on this. CNN, other mainstream media were repeating over and over again that he was killed by blunt force trauma, that he was killed by someone hitting with a fire extinguisher. And now seems to be the case that is not true, that is a false narrative. And, are they going to be banned on Twitter and Facebook now for, spreading false information? Is Facebook going to send its army of fact checkers to go and debunk them and downgrade them? Probably not, right? Because it fits their political interest. But it's important to note now, it seems to be the case that he died from inhaling the smoke they were using, that there were health complications from this. Let me explain a bit. It says, after nearly a month since his death, there was no evidence Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died from blunt force to the head on January 6th. Even CNN admits it's more likely he died from the effects of chemicals sprayed into the crowd that day. The media ran with the story that Officer Sicknick was beaten over the head with a fire extinguisher by Trump supporters. It was only later that the facts came out. ProPublica reported, not a conservative media, that Sicknick told his brother he was merely pepper sprayed. And according to Officer Sicknick's family, he suffered from a blood clot and stroke and was on a ventilator, according to Western Journal. Officer Brian Sicknick died on January 7th, the day after the Capitol protests, and immediately the media reported he died from injuries caused by blunt force to the head on January 6th. What does this mean? It means that the Trump supporters didn't kill anybody. It means actually that the people who died were killed by police violence, not by Trump supporters. Now, imagine if you had a Black Lives Matter protest at the Capitol building, and yes, there were violent protests in front of the White House. Remember that? Imagine if there were protests like that. Imagine if the day, remember when Trump, they said, gassed people, and again, they use tear gas and pepper bombs to go visit the church they had burned, the protesters had burned down across the street from the White House. Imagine if during those riots, right, police had killed 2 people, including an officer, and 3 people died of health complications. In other words, 5 people were killed not by the protesters, but by the attempts to put down the protesters. What would the narrative be, right? Do you think it would be that Trump is investigating Black Lives Matter and Antifa for domestic terrorism because 5 people were killed by officers on the site, directly or indirectly? Or do you think it would be that, 5 people were killed through the police response to the incident? And what do you think the narrative would be? How do you think that would unfold? This is what happened to Trump supporters on January 6th. It was not them who caused the violence. It was the response. Capitol Police, 1 officer, unfortunately, it's terrible, of course. It's terrible, but died, it appears now, from inhaling pepper spray and had health complications. 3 other people died from health complications. Unclear whether that's from the gas or from other issues, or who knows, maybe just had a stroke or something, maybe from stress. And then 1 woman shot and killed by a Capitol Police officer when you had 2 to 3 officers standing right in front of the doorway, and you had 2 to 3 heavily armed officers right behind her, meaning it was unnecessary use of force. What would the narrative be if the tables were switched? And how is it the case that it's the Trump supporters now being investigated for terrorism, domestic terrorism, based on that? All right, this is political framing of incidents using false narratives, false reporting to really go after what are in this case mostly innocent people. Frankly, ridiculous. This is fake news. Again, CNN spreading fake news, being used for political narrative to target innocent people, for exercising a right, although breaching the Capitol building, you're not protected on that, but people peacefully protesting, right? You are allowed under our Constitution to, again, right, peacefully gather, right? You are allowed to gather and protest, right? The right to assemble, right? This is what you're allowed to have. You are allowed to assemble, right? This is one of your protected rights, and that is now under siege because of fake news. Because CNN retracted the statement because of fake news. And the president himself is going to be impeached on this as well. Or they're trying to impeach him, I should say. Very, very unlikely, again, they're going to have the votes for it. And on this, to explain a bit more what's happening, right? At the same time this is happening, another story here, Black Lives Matter and Antifa are marching through Washington, D.C., chanting, "Burn it down." Now, Trump supporters were being called out just recently. You might have seen the viral video of them talking about attacking the media. You have Black Lives Matter and Antifa walking through Washington, D.C. right now chanting, "Burn it down." Is this being used to frame them as domestic terrorists? So they're calling for arson in the nation's capital. And they said this, right? They said, "We are here tonight because Black Lives Matter. Despite Black Lives Mattering, Black people are still dying at the hands of police paid by our tax dollars." Well, it seems that Trump supporters actually just died at the hands of police, but that doesn't seem to be the narrative right now. And they said, "Burn it down" in their chants, right?